On a late October night in 2023, in the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, a place nearly abandoned due to an underground coal mine fire that had been smoldering for decades, there was an old house located in isolation, rumored to be heavily haunted. This house once belonged to a wealthy family, but after a terrible tragedy, it was left behind, and stories of its haunting began to spread. Ethan Davis, whose name has been changed, a young man who loved exploring abandoned and supernatural locations. He often carried a camera or action camera to record his trips, hoping one day to capture something truly unusual. Hearing about the haunted house in Centralia, Ethan felt drawn to it. He decided to make a trip there, alone, at night, the time when spirits were said to be most active. He arrived in Centralia in the evening. The atmosphere here was gloomy and eerily silent. The asphalt roads were cracked. Heat rose from the ground in some areas, and the faint smell of sulfur hung in the air. Ethan found his way to the old house. It was on a deserted street, looking dilapidated and forgotten. The moonlight shone strangely on the house, highlighting the dark windows and peeling walls. A chilling feeling enveloped Ethan as he approached the house. The house seemed to emit a negative energy. Ethan took out his action camera, attached it to his head for POV angle, and started recording. He carried a flashlight and some basic tools. The front door of the house was broken or rotten. Ethan gently pushed the door. It creaked frighteningly and opened. It was dark and cold inside. The smell of old dust, mold, and something unpleasant, like death, filled his nostrils. Ethan shone his flashlight inside. He found himself standing in a large living room, full of dust and cobwebs. Damaged furniture lay scattered around, covered in white sheets. Ethan stepped inside, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. He began to explore the rooms, walking along the long and dark hallway. The house was very large, with many different rooms, an old bedroom with a collapsed bed, a dilapidated kitchen with dirty dishes still on the table, a bathroom. While walking around, Ethan felt as if someone was following him. He occasionally turned his head, shining his flashlight behind him, but saw no one. He heard strange noises, floorboards creaking upstairs, room doors slightly moving, wind whistling through broken window panes. Ethan tried to stay calm and continued recording. He knew these were signs of a haunting. Time passed. Ethan went deeper into the house. He checked the time on his phone. It was almost midnight. The haunted house in Centralia was welcoming him. And tonight, something special was waiting. Ethan didn't know that his exploration was about to lead him to a horrifying sight. A party he should never attend. The spirit soiree had just begun. Ethan continued to explore the haunted house in Centralia. The deeper he went inside, the heavier and colder the air became. Strange noises appeared more frequently. Whispers from the walls sounded clearer, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. He walked along a long and dark hallway on the ground floor. The walls were peeling, the old wallpaper torn. The room doors on either side were closed. As he passed a room door, Ethan suddenly heard a very faint giggle coming from inside. The laughter sounded sad and distant, like the laughter of a woman. He stopped, pressing his ear against the door. The laughter only lasted for a moment, then stopped completely. Ethan shivered. Perhaps It was the spirit of the woman who used to live here. He continued down the hallway. The creaking of the floorboards upstairs sounded clearer, as if someone was walking right above his head. He shone his flashlight on the ceiling. Nothing was there, only darkness. Ethan felt as if the house was coming alive, manifesting its haunting. He went up the stairs, the old wood creaking frighteningly under his feet. The stairs led to another hallway on the upper floor, also long and dark like the hallway downstairs. The upstairs hallway had more room doors. Ethan decided to explore the rooms on this floor. He opened the first door. It was an old bedroom. The bed had collapsed. The furniture was covered in dust. Nothing special. He closed the door and went to the next door. This time it was a room that looked like a child's room, with old toys scattered on the floor. As soon as he stepped into this room, a sudden cold draft engulfed him, colder than the cold outside. The cold was very different, very deep, as if it penetrated his bones. He heard a very faint sound from the corner of the room, a sound like a child sobbing. Ethan shone his flashlight into the corner of the room. He didn't see anything. The sobbing stopped. It was replaced by giggling. The laughter sounded cheerful, but with something strange, unnatural. The laughter seemed to come from one of the toys on the floor. An old, torn doll. Ethan shivered. He backed away from the room, slamming the door shut behind him. He knew that this upper floor seemed more heavily haunted. Sounds from the past seemed to echo more clearly here. Ethan continued down the upstairs hallway, trying to stay calm and keep recording. He wanted to capture everything that was happening. He didn't know that what he was recording wasn't just sounds and feelings. His camera was capturing things that were hard to see with the naked eye in the dark. Blurry black shapes, figures flitting past at the edge of the frame. The hallway of shadows was gradually taking shape on Ethan's camera screen, and he was going deeper into the center of the haunting. Ethan continued to walk down the upstairs hallway of the haunted house. He felt as if he was being pulled deeper into something evil. Strange noises continued to echo. Whispers from the walls sounded clearer, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. He reached the end of the hallway and found a door larger than the others. The door looked old and grand, as if leading into an important room. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then reached out and grasped the doorknob. The doorknob was unusually cold. He took a deep breath and slowly opened the large door. Light from his flashlight shone inside. It was a very large room. It seemed to be the ballroom or dining room of the old house. The room was spacious, with a wooden floor covered in dust, and old, torn paintings on the walls. In the center of the room, there was a long table, with chairs around it. On the table were old items, dirty plates, empty glasses, old wine bottles. It looked as if some kind of party had taken place here a very long time ago, and everything had been left in its original state. The air in this room was particularly cold and still, eerily still. However, as Ethan stepped into the room, he suddenly heard a very faint sound, like music echoing from a distance. The music sounded like a classical tune, melodious but with a hint of sadness and distance. Ethan stopped, listening. The music was very soft, difficult to hear clearly, but it was definitely music. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside this room. Ethan shone his flashlight around the room, trying to find the source of the music. There was no radio or music player. The melodious, sad music continued to play, blending with the eerie silence of the room. Then, he suddenly saw, around the long table in the center of the room, blurry figures slowly materialized in the darkness. The figures looked like people, but they were blurry, translucent, as if made of mist. They sat around the table, or stood next to each other, as if attending a party. Ethan held his breath. He was seeing the spirit soiree. The ghostly figures were indistinct, but Ethan could distinguish the shapes of men and women. Some looked like they were talking to each other. Some sat silently, staring into the void. They made no sound. Only the melodious, sad music continued to play from somewhere. Ethan shone his flashlight on the ghostly figures, and their faces appeared in the faint light. Their faces were blurry, unclear, but Ethan felt as if they were staring at him, even though their eyes were empty and soulless. A sense of utter terror enveloped Ethan. He was right in the middle of a ghostly party. He gathered all his courage, raised his action camera, trying to record this horrifying sight as clearly as possible. He didn't know that his action had broken the eerie peace of that soiree. He was facing the forgotten spirits in the haunted house in Centralia. And their party was about to turn into something else. Something much more terrifying. The forgotten soiree had been found, and the uninvited guest was not welcome. Ethan stood there, in the large room of the haunted house, with the action camera mounted on his head recording the horrifying scene, the ghostly party of spirits. The blurry figures sat or stood around the long table, emitting melodious, sad music. Their faces were blurry, their eyes empty, but they seemed to be looking straight at Ethan. Ethan felt adrenaline rush through his veins. This was what he had always been searching for. Proof of the existence of the supernatural world. He tried to keep the camera steady, recording every detail he could see in the faint light of the flashlight. He zoomed in on the ghostly figures, trying to see their faces clearly. As he moved around the room, the ghostly figures seemed to notice his presence. The melodious music suddenly stopped. An eerie silence fell over the room. The ghostly figures slowly turned their heads, looking directly at Ethan. Their empty eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. Not physical light, but some kind of inner light, full of anger and hatred. Ethan felt as if he was being stared at by dozens of invisible eyes at once. Then, something more terrifying happened. The ghostly figures began to move. They didn't move normally. They glided across the floor, or hovered in the air. With jerky, unnatural movements, they began to approach Ethan. Slowly, but surely. Whispers from somewhere echoed again. No longer faint, they sounded clear, full of threat. He has seen. Don't let him escape. Get him. Ethan was horrified. They knew he was recording them. They were not happy. He felt as if the room was suddenly shrinking. The walls were getting closer. The ghostly figures came closer and closer, their faces looking more distorted and terrifying in the faint light. Ethan knew he had to run. Immediately, he turned around, rushing towards the large door he had entered through. He heard faster gliding sounds behind him, angry whispers, and terrifying giggling. They were chasing him. Ethan ran down the long, dark hallway. The flashlight on his head bounced wildly. He heard the sounds behind him getting closer and closer. Gliding sounds, whispering. He didn't dare to turn his head to look. He ran down the stairs, stumbling a few times, but managed to get up and keep running. The haunted house seemed to come alive to fight against him. Doors automatically slammed shut in front of him. Objects fell down on his path. But he kept running, filled with utter terror. The action camera on his head was still recording everything. The horrifying scene of the ghostly party. And then the scene of him panicking and running in the dark house. The horrifying frame had been captured. Undeniable proof of the ghostly party at midnight. And of the forgotten spirits chasing Ethan. He was running from death. Or something worse than death. In the haunted house in Centralia, Ethan ran out of the large room, rushing down the dark hallway of the haunted house. Behind him, the ghostly figures of the party guests were in pursuit. Their gliding sound was gruesome, like the wind whistling, mixed with angry whispers and terrifying giggling. Ethan didn't dare to turn his head to look, he just ran. Ran as fast as he could. He felt as if their invisible claws were right behind his back, ready to pounce on him at any moment. The house seemed to be fighting against Ethan. Doors automatically slammed shut in front of him, forcing him to change direction. The floor beneath his feet became strangely slippery. He ran down to the ground floor, rushing towards the main door. The main door was already unlocked or broken, he could get out. However, as he approached the main door, it suddenly slammed shut with a loud bang. Ethan froze, horrified. The door had closed on its own, blocking his escape route. He heard the gliding sounds of the party spirits getting closer and closer. They had trapped him. Ethan turned around, looking down the long hallway. At the end of the hallway, in the darkness, he saw the blurry figures approaching. Their empty eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. They were no longer passive figures. They were hunters. Ethan ran back into the deeper parts of the house, trying to find another exit. He dashed into a random room, slamming the door shut behind him. He leaned against the door, gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He heard the gliding sounds of the party spirits stop outside the room door. Then, loud scratching sounds came from the door, like sharp claws trying to penetrate the wood. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The scratching was gruesome, persistent, making Ethan feel as if the door was about to be torn apart. He heard a faint growl from outside, like an animal, but with a strange, unnatural timbre. Ethan knew he couldn't stay in this room forever. The door wouldn't hold them for long. He ran to the window in the room, trying to open it. The window was jammed tight, as if locked from the outside by an invisible force. He was desperate. He was trapped in this room, besieged by angry spirits. The scratching on the room door grew more intense. Ethan looked around the room, searching for anything he could use to defend himself or barricade the door. He grabbed an old wooden chair, trying to use it to block the room door. But as he moved the chair, it was suddenly thrown out of his hands with great force, as if someone invisible had pushed it. Ethan watched in horror as the chair flew towards the wall. Terrifying giggling echoed from outside the room door, as if mocking him. The claws of the spirits were right outside the door. They wanted to catch him. Ethan knew his struggle for survival was not over. He had to get out of this room, get out of the haunted house, before it was too late. The horrifying chase in the haunted house was underway, and Ethan was the prey. Ethan escaped the room by lunging through another window. Even though it was also jammed tight, He felt as if he was pushed by some invisible force. A force that perhaps helped him escape. He fell onto the ground outside, aching all over. He didn't stop. He got up and ran. Ran as fast as he could. Without looking back, he heard gliding sounds and angry whispers echoing from the direction of the house. As if they were still in pursuit. He ran across the yard, out of the alley, and ran along the deserted street of Centralia. He ran until he was exhausted, no longer hearing any sounds. Ethan had escaped the haunted house. He had survived and returned from the spirit soiree. His body ached, his clothes were torn, but he was still alive. However, the horrifying fear he had experienced would forever haunt him. He remembered everything: the large room, the melodious music, the ghostly figures, the empty eyes, their attention, the angry whispers, the chase, the scratching on the door, and the most terrifying thing: the action camera on his head was still recording everything. Once safe and calmer, Ethan reviewed the footage from his action camera. His heart pounded as he watched the horrifying scene again. The footage showed him entering the large room, the flashlight illuminating the space. Then, the melodious music echoed. The blurry figures slowly materialized in the frame. They sat around the table. Blurry, translucent. The camera zoomed in on their faces. Blurry and terrifying. Then, the music stopped. The ghostly figures turned their heads, looking straight at the camera. Their empty eyes seemed to glow on the screen. Then, the chase began. The camera shook violently as Ethan panicked and ran. Only blurry images of walls and hallways were visible, and the sound of his heavy breathing. But in a few brief moments, the camera had captured horrifying images. Ghostly figures gliding in the darkness behind him, their empty eyes looking straight at the camera, as if they were looking straight at the viewer of the footage. Undeniable evidence. The ghostly party at midnight was real. The forgotten spirits in the haunted house in Centralia were real. And they were very dangerous. Ethan shared this footage online. On a video platform, the footage quickly went viral, causing debate and fear online. Some people believed the story. Others were skeptical, claiming it was fake footage. However, no one could deny its eerie and difficult to explain nature. For Ethan, that footage was evidence from the depths of hell. It was proof that he had entered a place he should never have entered. And he had seen things that no one should ever see. Ethan never returned to Centralia. He couldn't face that place. The haunted house, and the forgotten spirits. The haunting memory of the ghostly party and the chase would forever follow him. He lived in perpetual fear, knowing that those spirits were still there, trapped in the old house. The legacy of the trip to the haunted house is a life full of haunting. Ethan escaped the claws of the spirits, but he carried their nightmare into his life. The ghostly party at midnight is real. And it was recorded. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, or stories based on accounts and recorded evidence, like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the channel to follow our latest videos. We will bring you more terrifying and haunting stories. Thank you for listening.